Hello, with me is Dale Trumbore, born in 1987. She's a Los Angeles-based composer and writer whose music has been called devastatingly beautiful by the Washington Post and praised for its soaring melodies and beguiling harmonies by the New York Times. Dale's compositions have been performed widely in the United States and internationally, winner of numerous awards. Dale kindly introduced herself back to me in 2014 when she was in residence on the 15-acre ranch that is the Helen Wurlitzer Foundation of New Mexico up in Taos. Dale is passionate about setting music to poems and prose and found text by living writers. And in her first book, Staying Composed, Overcoming Anxiety and Self-Doubt Within a Creative Life, she has written extensively about working through creative blocks and establishing a career in music. Dale, welcome.
Hi, so glad to be here.
Polyphony Voices of New Mexico is singing your work Flair in its upcoming Awakenings Music of Diversity concerts in both Santa Fe on March 31st and Albuquerque on April 2nd. And the Polyphony singers are having a wonderful time learning and working on putting this piece together. Could you share a little bit about the writing of Flair and how you came upon the text?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough during my master's at USC to take a class called, I think it was called Composers and Writers, or Writers and Composers. And the whole point was to bring together a bunch of grad students getting their MFAs in poetry and a bunch of students getting their masters and doctorates in composing, and just put us in a room together and pair us up and see what projects came out of that. Now, this project did not emerge from that class, but I did meet poet Stacey Null, who I think is really incredible. And I actually followed up with her, I think a few years, 2-ish years after that class to say, do you have a book? Do you have more of your poems I can read? Because I was looking for a text for this particular commission, which involves a whole bunch of treble choirs. I think it was like 32 choirs at the time that I wrote this piece. And so Stacey sent this poem among other poems, and I just loved the motion in it. I think sometimes it's hard as a composer to find a piece that has a really strong rhythmic drive inherently built into the poem. We see a lot of poems, a lot of choral texts that are slow and beautiful and have really lush imagery, but this has the lush imagery and it's really fast paced. It's about running through a forest, trying to catch up and chasing and leaping. And I just was so taken by the tone of the poem and the language used, and again, that really fast propelling motion.
And at the very beginning of the piece, there's this wonderful opportunity for choristers to also use their voices in a unique way, right? In a much more sort of speaking, whispered kind of speaking, energetic speaking way. And so audiences can look forward to kind of that opening of wait, and then you kind of wait to see what happens next.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a strong start in the poem too, and that was what inspired that just the word wait. And Stacey on the page too, if you're looking at a printed version of this poem, the words sort of chase each other across the page. They exist in space. They take up all the space that they can as they dart among the blank page. So yeah, that word wait set all by itself. I was like, this has to be special in some way, and that's what that whisper, that sort of stage whisper, comes in.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard it as a shout too, which I think is kind of fun. Like there are moments, sometimes a choir will make a choice where I actually like that choice equally as much as what I've put on the page. Yeah.
I think with our 14 singers, we're still kind of playing with that. We're still kind of playing like, well, what exactly are we waiting for? What do we want our audience to wait for? How do we want our audience to react to that opening of that piece? So we're still kind of playing around with that and having fun. Here in New Mexico, we've just made masking optional. And so choral ensembles are rediscovering each other's faces. And also, I think perhaps realizing how having a veiled face affected their approach to singing. And speaking of the pandemic, which hopefully we're nearly out of, how did the pandemic affect your work as a composer?
Yeah, it was hard. I feel like in some ways it is still hard, even though maybe we're nearing the end, or at least the endemic phase of the pandemic. It was really hard to sort of create music in a vacuum, not knowing when it would be performed, especially as someone who writes primarily for chorus. I mean, I love writing chamber music, I love writing orchestral music, but of all the ensembles to be affected by this, like just to be told that breathing in the same room as other people could be deadly, I think that it was just so devastating for the choir community. And to just, like, as a composer still finishing out some contracts at the early stages of the pandemic, I just felt like I was sending pieces into a black hole. Um, but luckily, now they're emerging out of the black hole. They've popped out the other side. I'm getting a lot of those premieres and performances that were all rescheduled to what felt like just an infinite amount of time away. Now we're here, we're in the future, and they're happening, and that feels really great.
You mentioned how challenging it was writing in that sort of vacuum and in your sort of own isolation. Did you find yourself seeking poetry that was comforting, or did you find yourself seeking poetry that was mirroring your current status in isolation?
I found, well, I created these two strange little pieces that I'm sort of hoping no one ever does again, but they were designed to be performed over Zoom, and to intentionally lag and overlap. And one of them was just all the phrases that we kept saying at the time, that, oh, I hope you're doing well, I hope you're safe and happy. And that was sort of a way of processing those emotions in real time, again, early on in the pandemic. And then what I actually found myself doing for a lot of it was I had been in a short story writing workshop already before the pandemic, but I really took the time to edit a bunch of stories and send them out. And now I'm reaping the benefits of that, where I'm seeing short stories that I've written published. And I actually have a finished collection that I'm sending out, which maybe sounds like a strange approach, but I think it's really helpful. And this serves me well in non-pandemic times too, to just ask, what's something, like, what's the not necessarily the easiest thing, but the most enjoyable thing that you like, something you just love doing. And sometimes you just have to turn to that. I also baked a lot of bread. Like, I just sort of did, yeah, I just did what I found enjoyable at the time. And it was just sort of anything to get through the days. And strangely enough, that that virtual writing workshop, really just having that in my calendar, like every Monday morning, as something, a place to show up and a place to gather with other writers, that really served me in a way that composing could not, which again turned out to be a really beautiful thing, because now I have all these short stories that I've written that I never expected to be a thing that I'd create.
Wonderful to have that additional creative outlet, especially in a time when, well, they were very anxious times. And it's interesting that you wrote a book about overcoming anxiety and self-doubt within a creative life. And this was pre-pandemic when the book came out. Did you find people flocking to your book sort of for some sort of, for comfort, for ideas, for community?
Yeah, I did. And I found that some people were reading the book and actually thought that it had come out during the pandemic, which I thought was really wonderful. And kind of, I could never predicted, like, let's write a book about anxiety within a creative life, and then have that, like, what happens when your creative livelihood is just taken from you. The timing was good in that sense, I guess, but I did not expect that it would be, a lot of people would be turning to it for comfort in the way that they have. And that's just, so there's nothing more validating or fulfilling, or it just makes me so immensely happy and grateful that this book has been finding, in a slow, steady sort of way, finding exactly the readers that I hoped it would find.
That's awesome. I love hearing that. So what's on your desk currently? What are you writing? What are you thinking about, musically speaking?
Yeah, I have two non-choral projects coming up. The one behind me that is in progress on my piano right now is a piece for solo percussion, a short piece for a percussionist that I went to college with, who's really wonderful. And that she'll actually be speaking the text of this poem that's part of this project, even though it's not for a singer. She's going to be giving sort of like a dramatic interpretation as she plays the marimba, which I'm really excited about. And then I'm writing a piece for solo piano that's going to become a ballet for a ballet company in Modesto, California. And that's going to be about, I think, a half-hour project, and I'm going to record that on an album too, which I'm really excited about. And then down the line, there's a lot more choral music coming too. But for right now, I get a little dive into marimba and piano, taking a percussion turn instead.
I love that. I love that journey. I absolutely love the marimba. When I was a university student as a piano major in my first degree, I took percussion as a minor, and marimba turned out to be one of my favorite instruments. And there isn't a whole lot written for solo marimba or even solo marimba or marimba and piano. That's awesome. I hope too that you'll consider writing marimba and organ, because I think there needs to be more
Ooh,
marimba and organ.
I love that. I hadn't thought of that as a sonic possibility, but now I'm imagining it in my head, and it's very cool.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
you have one instrument where the sound dies almost instantly unless you choose to sustain it with a tremolo, and then another instrument where the sound does nothing but sustain until you
that's
really,
right.
that's really cool.
Yeah. And I was interested to see in your catalog that you have written for the organ and choir. And I'd love to talk to you more about that, but that might have to be a second interview. So, Dale, thank you so much for joining me today to chat a little bit about yourself and your work, and Flair. Polyphony is very much looking forward to performing these two works at the end of March here on March 31st up in Santa Fe at St. John's United Methodist Church, and here in Albuquerque on Saturday, April 2nd at 5 p.m. at the Cathedral of St. John. Thank you, Dale.
Thank you.